Hello friends, welcome hipsters, flipsters, and finger popping daddies and groovy chicks. Welcome back. This is part 2 of my tutorial on Solar by Miles Davis, and this is Miles playing in the background on his album Working, and this is the song 4 by Miles Davis. And you know, I wanted to do part 2 because there was a segment I left out of part 1 that I meant to include on sequencing your lines, and it was repeating your lines in a certain way. And you know, I read this quote by this lady who was an actress in the early 1900s. She was born in 1908, I think, and died in 1944. But anyway, her name is Mary Lou Cook. And this is the quote, and it aligns with what Miles was saying, and I love this quote. She said this: "Creativity is inventing, experimenting, growing, taking risks, breaking rules, making mistakes, and having fun." I love that. In other words, you can have fun making mistakes, taking risks, and all the other things that are involved there, and still come out ahead. And I encourage you to do that, and that's what these videos are all about for me. It's a creative process in which I enjoy, and I want to share it with you. And you're my family, and I welcome you into my home, and I'm glad you're here, and I love to hear from you. So here we go now with part 2. I'm going to give you an alternate take now that I did of Solar, and I'm going to talk about a few more points. Here we go with Solar. Now, people have asked me on this particular video, how did I pick out the scales or select the scales that I use to play on? Now, this is an involved subject because scales are just a means to an end. I look at scales as important to learn, but how to use the scale to create melodies, in other words, to create a melody which involves having passing tones and target tones within it, that's why you want to learn scales, is to be able to do that. But the most important thing is to get the target tones and the passing tones. So if I take the first chord, it might be, I might say a C minor 6 or a C minor 6, 9, or I might even make it a major 7. Basically, I'm going to be playing that scale because it sounds right to me. You know, I could do this, put that in there. Now that's a Dorian scale. In other words, the Dorian scale is the second step or the second mode, so it would be the second step of a major scale. So that's the second step of B flat major scale. So it's a B flat major scale starting on C. And that gives you the Dorian mode. And they have to have that B flat in there. Now, if you were going to play, say you were going to play an Aeolian mode or a natural minor scale, that would be built on E flat. So you'd have this, that A flat in there. And I can use that scale too, but mostly I'm going to be using the Dorian scale, and then I'm going to be alter it with that natural B there, which gives us a leading tone back to C. Some people have asked me what scales I use for improvisation on this song Solar. So what I've done is I've written out the score for you with my left-hand voicings that I used, or at least some of them. And on page 2 of this, I'm giving you the scales for improvisation, the scales that I use as a basis for improvisation. And then I have a third page in which I've included an 8th note drill, in which you're playing through the chord progression all on 8th notes that I've written out for you. It's kind of an exercise to prepare for improvisation and get smooth and get even with your 8th notes, which are very important to improvisation. So this is a 3-page score that you can get as a download for free on my website. Also, I wanted to talk about on this particular take, it was an alternate take. It wasn't the take that I used in the original, the first video of this, because it had actually mistakes. It had some really good things that I thought that I liked. That's why I used it. I do a number of takes, and then I pick the best take, probably the take in which I get the best feeling, or I get maybe some unique ideas, or I have more fluidity. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, but this particular take had mistakes. Now, remember we talked about that at the beginning of the first video, that, you know, it's okay to make a mistake. You might play a great lick, and you make a mistake at the end, or you hit a wrong note, or what, and you hit that kind of note, a bad note, and you have to live with that. You might not be able to live with that. You might be a perfectionist, and I can't live with that, so I won't use it. But anyway, I did a run on this where I ended up on that note, on the C minor, so now I had to cover that up, but I had to create a line off of it. In other words, Monk would talk about that. There's no wrong notes. In other words, if you play a wrong note, play it again. In other words, make a new line out of that note. And that's an interesting thing. Another thing that I did in this video that was interesting, I thought, was this particular take. Was I played a 3 against 4. Now that I got that from Bill Evans. He does that on a song called Periscope in the head. But he did a lot in his playing where he would play a pattern of 3 over 4. So you'd have these overlapping lines that would overlap on different beats of the measure, and then you had to come out in the right place. Well, somehow I was able to pull it off, but it was like this 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, and that was an overlap. So it's dotted quarters, 2 dotted quarters make up 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, and I was doing it over a 4/4 time. And somehow I came out of it even at the right place. You can't come out when you're using a backing track. With a live band, they might go with you if you come off wrong, but with a backing track, you can't do that. So fortunately, that came out right. And that's the thing I got listening to Bill Evans. And you might want to do that because you might want to listen to how he does that, because he used that on Periscope, and Monk does that a lot. He overlaps lines, like he did that on Straight No Chaser, where he does a line, then he overlaps, and he puts the same phrase and overlaps it in a different part of the measure. He did that with Blue Monk. Simple thing like that. He even did Blue Monk, where a particular phrase is repeated, but it's in a different place in the measure. So ask me about that, and we'll talk about it more. Next thing I want to talk about is the idea of sequences. Now, a sequence is just an idea that you play and then you repeat it transposed for the most part, or it's, you know, like in Satin Doll will be, now it's repeated here. So on the sequence I might go, in this tune I might go like something like, that, you see. So I'm going to do, you see, it might vary it slightly, but you know, maybe in a simple way it might be something like this. Then I would change it up. This is something that I really picked up a lot from listening to Horace Silver, because he would do these simple little ideas and then he would repeat them transposed, and then he would come up with a new idea. He might do something like this. You see, now what that does is it makes your solo sound logical, just like a conversation. You know, like one thought comes to the next. You know, we went to the store, we bought eggs, and then we packaged everything up and we went home. You know, in other words, all those ideas are connected. And so that's what I'm trying to do when I improvise. I'm trying to connect ideas, and I think that makes your improvisation more interesting, more fun, more challenging. It's something to do that's really fun to do, like, you know. You know, it can get too much. It can get to be too much, so you want to vary it with enough variety, so you're not always playing sequences, but you're playing them enough so that everything holds together like glue. In other words, the solo is going from one place to the next, and you're telling a story in your improvisation. You want to tell a story that makes sense logically. Here we go with the word logic again. But anyway, let's try, like, you know, something like maybe this. Now in the last part, because it moves the chords, the 2/5s are moving quicker, you have to get the ideas in there quicker, you see. So that's the challenge here. Here's a look inside my book. This is chapter 24, volume 2. It's called Scales for Improvisation. Now these are what I consider the most important scales to learn for jazz improvisation. And there's 8 pages of scales here: your major, your minor, your diminished, your dominant, pentatonic scales, and so on. But what I've done is I've given you the chord plus the scale, and then also an application of the scale in a phrase that's practical. So I've tried to make this practical for you, and it's not just learning scales, but also learning how to use them. And you can see this is in a 3-ring binder, lies flat against your music stand, and you can take the pages out easily. You can take them out for photocopying, so it's really practical that way. Yeah, so I tried to cover some things that I didn't cover in part 1 in this part 2. And specifically, you know, a little more detail about how I find the scales and how I did the overlapping idea with the 3 against 4, and also the idea that taking more risks, you're going to have mistakes, and sometimes that's even better. Take those risks and make a mistake, you know, and eventually you get better at taking risks and not making mistakes. So, but you have to at least jump in there and try to take a risk.